The bell above the door gave a sharp jingle, and every sound in the shop seemed to die at once. She felt it before she saw him, the shift in the air, the way the men outside stopped talking, the way her hands, steady just a second before, began to tremble over the glass jar she was sealing. In a small frontier town where dust carried news faster than any telegram, strangers were noticed and feared. Clara had learned that lesson early. She lifted her eyes slowly, her breath caught somewhere between her chest and her throat. The doorway framed a tall figure against the bright afternoon sun. A cowboy hat cast a shadow over his face, but there was no hiding the broad shoulders, the worn leather vest, the revolver resting low on his hip. He stood still, letting the door swing shut behind him, his boots heavy against the wooden floor. Her heart pounded so loud she thought he might hear it. The apothecary shelves behind her were lined with glass bottles, dried herbs, and folded cloth. It was her father's shop once, and now it was hers. A quiet place in a town that had seen too much gun smoke and not enough mercy. She had worked hard to keep it that way, respectable, peaceful, but peace never lasted long in the West. He stepped forward, and the floor creaked beneath his boots. Dust clung to him like he had ridden for miles without rest. His jaw was rough with a day's beard, and his eyes, when she finally saw them, were not wild as she had expected. They were steady, watchful, the kind of eyes that had seen trouble and walked through it. Still, fear rooted her to the floor. Word had spread that a drifter was coming through town. Some said he had been part of a range war. Others whispered he had outdrawn a man in cold blood. No one knew the truth. In a western town, stories grew teeth before they ever found a spine. He stopped at the counter, close enough that she could see the faint scar along his cheek, close enough that she could smell leather and sun and something else she could not name. "I'm looking for laudanum," he said, his voice low and calm. "Not a demand, not a threat, a request?" She swallowed. "It's kept behind the counter," she answered, proud that her voice did not break. "It's not sold lightly?" His gaze flickered, not in anger, but in something softer. "It ain't for me." Outside, a horse neighed. A wagon rolled past. Life carried on, unaware that Clara's world felt as though it had narrowed to the space between them. This was how trouble started. A stranger walks in, a story unfolds. A woman gets caught in the middle. She had seen it happen before. "Who is it for?" she asked carefully. For a long moment he did not answer. His hand rested near his belt, not touching the gun, just close enough to remind anyone watching that he knew how to use it. Clara's pulse quickened again. If he meant harm, no one would reach her in time. Then he did something she did not expect. He removed his hat. It was a simple gesture, almost old-fashioned. The kind her father used to make when greeting a lady. Sunlight fell across his face fully now, revealing exhaustion more than menace. There were faint lines at the corners of his eyes. Not cruel lines, hard ones. "My sister," he said quietly. "She took sick on the trail. Fever won't break." The words hung between them, heavy and honest. Clara blinked. The image in her mind shifted. Not a ruthless outlaw, not a gunfighter looking to stir up dust and blood. A brother, worried, afraid. The realization unsettled her more than his entrance had. In this western town where men measured worth by the speed of their draw, fear was rarely admitted. Yet she saw it there now, tucked behind his steady stare. She moved slowly, reaching for the small locked cabinet beneath the counter. Her fingers fumbled with the key. She hated that he could see her shaking. "You came alone?" she asked, unsure why the question mattered. He hesitated, just long enough. "No." A chill slipped down her spine. Before she could ask more, the bell above the door rang again, louder this time. Voices followed, rough, urgent. Clara's eyes snapped toward the entrance. The cowboy turned his head slightly, just enough to listen. Bootsteps approached from outside, fast and certain. His jaw tightened, not in fear. Indecision. "You might want to step back," he murmured, his voice no longer calm but edged with something protective. The peaceful little shop, her father's legacy, suddenly felt like the center of a coming storm. She had been terrified when he walked in, certain he would bring trouble to her door. But as the shadows gathered beyond the glass and the voices grew nearer, she realized with a start that he might not be the danger at all. And when the door handle began to turn, She understood that whatever happened next would bind her life to his in a way neither of them could yet imagine. The door swung inward with a force that made the bell shriek. 3 men stepped inside, carrying the smell of sweat, tobacco, and the open range. Their boots thudded against the wooden floor, loud and careless. Clara's grip tightened around the small bottle in her hand, and she felt the weight of the room shift once more. The cowboy did not reach for his gun. He did not even turn fully around. He simply moved half a step to the side, placing himself between Clara and the door without making a show of it. The gesture was subtle, but it changed everything. "Well now," one of the men drawled, his eyes sliding from Clara to the stranger. "We've been looking for you." The stranger's voice remained steady. "I figured as much." Clara's heart began to pound again. So the rumors were true. He was being followed. That meant danger, and danger in a small frontier town always spilled over onto whoever stood closest. The tallest of the 3 men leaned against a shelf, knocking a row of glass bottles together with a careless bump. Clara flinched at the sound. Those bottles were her livelihood. Her father had built this apothecary from nothing when the railroad first cut through the valley. She had spent years proving that a woman could run it alone. "You've got something that doesn't belong to you," the tall man said. The cowboy finally turned, just enough for Clara to see the hard set of his jaw. "I don't carry what you're looking for. Not in your pocket," the man replied, smiling without warmth. "But you're leading us to it." Clara's mind raced. Leading them to what? Money? Land? A person? The stranger's sister? Her stomach dropped. Outside, the wind picked up, pushing dust against the shop windows. The town had been uneasy for weeks. Ranchers arguing over water rights. New settlers arriving with more hope than sense. The old families guarding what little they had left. It did not take much to spark a feud out here. "I won't have trouble in my shop," Clara said, surprising even herself with the firmness in her voice. "If you have business, take it outside." The 3 men looked at her as if noticing her for the first time. One of them gave a short laugh. "Brave little thing, ain't she?" The cowboy's shoulders stiffened. "Leave her out of it." Something passed between them, unspoken, but sharp. Clara realized then that this was not a random meeting. There was history here, the kind that stretched beyond town lines and into open prairie. "Your sister's real sick, you say?" the tall man asked, stepping closer. "That's a shame." "Be a shame if we found her before you did." Clara felt the blood drain from her face. The cowboy's hand finally hovered near his revolver, not drawing it, just resting close, his voice lowered. "You don't know where she is? We know enough." Silence settled thick and heavy. Even the wind outside seemed to pause. Clara's thoughts scrambled. If his sister was somewhere near town, hiding perhaps, and these men were hunting her, then this was no simple misunderstanding. This was pursuit. And she had just handed him the medicine he needed to reach the girl. She remembered her own father coughing through long nights, fever burning his skin. She had been helpless then, too young to know what to do. That memory stirred something inside her stronger than fear. "You should leave," she said quietly to the 3 men. "All of you," they ignored her. Instead, the tallest one stepped forward until he was nearly nose to nose with the cowboy. "You can't outrun this," he said softly. "Not this time." The stranger did not back down. But Clara noticed something in his eyes, something she had missed before. Not just worry, guilt, whatever this was, it had started long before he rode into town. One of the other men glanced toward the window. "Sheriff's making his round soon," he muttered. The tall man straightened. "This ain't finished," he told the cowboy. "You know where to find us?" They turned and walked out as abruptly as they had entered, the door slamming behind them. The bell rattled until it finally settled. Clara realized she had not taken a full breath in minutes. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then she found her voice. "Who are they?" He stared at the closed door as if expecting it to burst open again. "Men I used to ride with." Her chest tightened. "And now?" "Now we don't see things the same way." That was not an answer, not really. But it was all he offered. She placed the small bottle of laudanum on the counter between them. "If your sister is near town, she isn't safe." "Not if they know she's here." He nodded once. "I won't let them touch her." The certainty in his voice made her look at him differently, not as a threat, not as a drifter, but as a man carrying more than his share of trouble, Where is she? Clara asked before she could stop herself. He hesitated again, weighing something in his mind. Trust did not come easy in the West. It was earned slow and lost fast. "Old line shack by the dry creek," he said finally. She couldn't ride any farther. Clara knew the place, isolated, exposed. If those men were serious, they would search there first. "You can't face them alone," she said. His gaze met hers, steady and searching. "I've been alone a long time." The words held more meaning than he likely intended. Outside, a distant shout echoed down the street. Clara moved to the window and saw two of the men speaking with someone near the saloon. They were not leaving town, they were settling in. A knot formed in her stomach. This was bigger than a simple disagreement. It felt like the beginning of something that would split the town in two. When she turned back, he was watching her, as if waiting for a decision she had not yet spoken aloud. She had been terrified when he first walked through her door. Terrified of what he might bring with him. Now she was afraid of what would happen if she did nothing. And as the sun dipped lower over the dusty western town, casting long shadows across the street, Clara realized she was already stepping into a story that would change her quiet life forever. The light outside turned a deep shade of gold, and the town slowed the way it always did at dusk. Cattle were driven into pens, shop doors closed one by one, and the piano from the saloon began its nightly tune. Clara stood behind her counter, staring at the stranger as if she were looking at a crossroads. "You should go to her," she said at last. "Before they do." "I will," he answered. "Soon as it's dark. That might be too late." He did not argue, but the silence between them carried weight. He was measuring risk, she could see it. Not just for himself, but for his sister, and maybe now for her too. "What did you mean?" she asked carefully. "When you said you used to ride with them?" He ran a hand over his beard, eyes drifting toward the shelves of medicine jars as if the answer might be hidden there. "We worked cattle together south of the river. Drove herds up through the valley. Did what we had to when ranchers wouldn't pay fair? That sounds like rustling. It was," he said plainly. The honesty caught her off guard. No excuses, no pretty words. Just truth. "My sister never knew the half of it," he continued. "She thinks I'm better than I am." Clara studied him. "Maybe you are." He gave a faint, tired smile. "That's not what they think." Outside, two boys ran past the window, laughing, unaware of the quiet storm building in their small western town. Clara wondered how long innocence lasted in a place like this. Not long, she had learned. "Why are they after her?" she asked. "They think I hid something," he replied. "Money from the last drive. They believe I told her where it is. Did you?" His jaw tightened. "No," the answer came quick, but there was something behind it. Not quite a lie. Not quite the whole truth. Clara stepped out from behind the counter for the first time since he had arrived. The distance between them felt smaller now, charged in a different way. Fear still lingered, but it had changed shape. "You don't have to tell me everything," she said softly. "But if you expect help, I need to know what kind of trouble is walking toward us." He looked at her then, really looked at her, as if weighing whether she could carry the truth. "One of those men lost more than money on that drive," he said quietly. "His younger brother got caught in a stampede. He blames me for pushing the herd too hard." Clara felt the air leave her lungs. Grief could turn a man reckless, vengeful. "And do you blame yourself?" she asked. His silence was answer enough. A knock sounded at the side door of the shop, sharp and quick. Clara startled. Few people used that entrance. "I'll get it," she said, though her pulse had quickened again. She found the sheriff waiting outside, hat tipped low, concern etched across his weathered face. He was not an unkind man, but he believed in order above all else. "I saw those riders go in," he said quietly. "What's their business here?" Clara hesitated. Telling him everything could mean the stranger's arrest. Saying nothing could mean worse. "They were asking questions," she replied carefully. "About someone passing through." The sheriff studied her. "You're harboring trouble?" "No," she said quickly. "I'm running a shop?" He nodded slowly, but his gaze drifted past her shoulder toward the dim interior. "This town's already sitting on dry timber," he said. "All it needs is a spark." When she returned inside, the stranger had moved closer to the window, watching the street. "Sheriff?" he asked. She nodded. Does he know? Not yet. He exhaled, and for a moment she saw the weight he carried more clearly than ever. He was not just protecting his sister. He was running from a past that refused to stay buried. Why come through here at all? Clara asked. You could have ridden around town. She was burning up, he said. I needed medicine. And this is the only apothecary for 50 miles. Her father's legacy again. The one place that could tip the balance between life and death. A shadow crossed the window, and both of them turned. One of the men from earlier stood across the street, leaning against a post, watching the shop, waiting. They're not going to let this go, Clara murmured. No, he agreed. The reality of it settled heavy between them. If the men believed his sister knew something, they would not stop searching. And if the sheriff sensed a feud brewing, he might step in before anyone could explain. You should not be dragged into this, he said suddenly. This is my burden. She met his gaze. You walked into my life the moment you opened that door. Whether I like it or not, I'm already part of it. The words surprised them both. Outside, the sky darkened to a deep blue. Lanterns flickered to life along the boardwalk. The town looked peaceful, almost gentle. But Clara could feel the tension humming beneath it like a wire pulled too tight. What happens if they find her first? She asked quietly. His expression hardened. They won't. It was not bravado. It was promise, yet Clara knew promises could break under pressure. And the men outside had the patience of hunters. As night settled over the frontier, the distance between safety and disaster felt thinner than ever. The sick girl in the line shack, the grieving brother seeking blame, the sheriff guarding order, and a woman who had never meant to step into a Western romance tangled with danger. Clara realized this was no longer just about medicine or old grudges. It was about choices. About who a person decided to be when the past came knocking. And somewhere beyond the edge of town, a lonely shack by the dry creek held a feverish girl who might become the center of a fight that could change all their lives. The stranger moved toward the door, ready to step back into the dark. Clara's voice stopped him. You're not going alone? He turned slowly, surprise flickering in his eyes. Outside, the man across the street straightened as if sensing movement. The night was closing in, and whatever decision they made next would set the course for everything that followed. You're not going alone? The words hung in the air between them, bold and frightening all at once. He studied her as if trying to decide whether she understood what she was offering. It's a rough ride, he said quietly. And it could turn worse. I've ridden before, Clara replied. And I know that shack better than most. If your sister's fever is high, she may need more than laudanum. Across the street, the man watching them shifted his weight, eyes fixed on the shop door. The town lanterns flickered in the growing dark, casting long shadows over the wooden boardwalk. Every movement felt noticed. The stranger gave a short nod. We leave through the back. Clara moved quickly, gathering a small satchel with clean cloth, willow bark, and a jar of salve her father once swore by. Her hands were steady now. Fear had not disappeared, but it had sharpened into purpose. They slipped out through the side door, keeping to the narrow alley that ran behind the row of shops. The night air was cool against her face, carrying the scent of dust and distant rain. Somewhere a dog barked. Somewhere else a piano struck a wrong note and went silent. Do they know about the shack? She whispered as they reached the hitching post behind her store. They know it exists, he answered, tightening the saddle on his horse. They don't know I'd risk bringing her this close to town. That may not matter if they're watching the roads. He glanced toward the open land beyond the last building. We'll cut along the creek bed. It's slower but harder track. Clara mounted her mare, heart pounding as they rode into the dark. The town lights faded behind them, swallowed by the wide stretch of prairie. The moon had not yet risen, and the only guide was the pale ribbon of the dry creek winding through scrub and rock. The silence between them felt different out here. More honest. The sound of hooves pressing into sand, the soft jingle of tack, the steady breath of horses. It was a rhythm older than the town itself. You could still turn back, he said after a while. So could you, she replied. He did not answer that. As they rode, Clara's thoughts turned to the girl waiting in the line shack. A young woman caught in the middle of a feud she did not start. Clara understood that feeling too well. After her father's death, ranchers had tried to push her out, claiming she could not manage accounts or supply orders alone. She had fought quietly, stubbornly, and won her place. Maybe that was why she could not stand aside now. They reached the rise overlooking the dry creek, and he held up a hand. Both horses slowed. Down below, a faint glow flickered near the old shack. Clara's breath caught. "You left no lantern." "I know." The glow moved, then split into two smaller lights. "They're already there," she whispered. He stared down at the scene, jaw tightening. The shack sat alone against the dark land, its roof sagging, walls thin against wind and weather. 2 horses were tied outside. Shadows shifted inside the doorway. For a moment he closed his eyes, as if steadying himself. When he opened them, the softness Clara had seen earlier was gone. In its place was resolve. "They won't hurt her," he said, more to himself than to her. "You don't know that." His hand rested on the reins, knuckles pale. "I won't let them." Below, one of the shadows stepped out of the shack and scanned the land. Clara recognized the tall shape of the man from the apothecary. He paced like someone certain he held the upper hand. "If they believe she knows something," Clara said carefully, "they may try to force it out of her." He turned sharply toward her, pain flashing across his face. "She knows nothing about money, but she knows about you." The truth of that seemed to strike deeper than any accusation. Whatever had happened on that cattle drive, whatever guilt he carried, it had followed him here. A sudden shout rose from the shack. A woman's voice, weak but defiant. Clara's stomach twisted. "Her fever," she murmured. "If she's standing, she shouldn't be." He swung down from his horse. "Stay here." She dismounted just as quickly. "No." He hesitated, torn between protecting her and reaching his sister. "If we rush in, they'll think you're there to fight," she said. "Let me go first." "They won't expect it. You don't know them." "I know men who think they hold power," she replied softly. "Sometimes surprise is stronger than a gun." Another shout cut through the night, followed by the crash of something wooden striking the ground. Clara's pulse roared in her ears. "We're running out of time," she said. He looked at her, and in that look was trust forming in real time. Not born of comfort, but of shared danger. "Once we move," he said quietly, "there's no turning back." She thought of her quiet shop, the neat rows of bottles, the steady life she had fought to keep. She thought of the feverish girl inside that shack. She thought of the man standing beside her, torn between his past and the chance to become something better. "I'm not turning back," she answered. Below, one of the lanterns inside the shack tipped, casting wild shadows against the thin walls. The tall man's voice rose, sharp and impatient. The situation was slipping. The stranger reached for her hand without thinking, then seemed startled by his own gesture. His grip was warm, steady, grounding. "Whatever happens," he said, voice low, "thank you." She squeezed his hand once. "Let's bring her home." Together they started down the slope toward the line shack, hearts pounding, every step carrying them closer to the moment that would decide everything. They did not run. They walked straight toward the shack, steady and unafraid, as if they had every right to be there. The tall man was the first to notice them. He stepped out into the lantern light, surprise flashing across his face when he saw Clara at the front instead of the cowboy. "Well now," he said slowly. "Didn't expect company." Clara kept her voice calm, though her heart felt like it might break through her ribs. "I came to check on a patient," she said. "You've made enough noise to wake the whole valley." Behind him, she could see the girl inside, pale and shaking, trying to sit upright on the narrow cot. Sweat clung to her forehead. The sight hardened Clara's resolve. The cowboy stopped a few steps behind Clara, not hiding, but not reaching for his weapon either. His presence was strong, protective, but controlled. "You've no business here," the tall man said, though his tone had lost some of its bite. "I have every business," Clara replied. "She's sick. Fever like that can turn dangerous fast. If anything happens to her, it won't be because of money or old grudges. It'll be because you chose pride over sense." The other 2 men shifted uneasily. They had expected a standoff. They had not expected a woman from town speaking plain truth under the open sky. "We ain't here to hurt her," one of them muttered. "Then step aside," Clara said firmly. "Let me do my work." For a long moment no one moved. The lantern crackled. The wind rustled through dry grass. The entire western night seemed to wait. The tall man finally stepped back. Clara did not waste a second. She entered the shack and knelt beside the girl, placing a cool hand on her forehead. The heat was still high, but her pulse, though weak, was steady. "I've got you," Clara whispered gently. The cowboy remained at the doorway, watching everything but keeping his temper in check. His eyes met his sister's, and in that look there was relief, apology, and fierce love all at once. Clara worked quickly, mixing willow bark and water, guiding the girl to drink small sips. She spoke softly, steady and soothing, the way her father once had with frightened patience. Outside, the men's voices faded into low murmurs. After a while, the girl's breathing eased. The tightness left her face. She lay back against the thin pillow, exhausted but calmer. Clara stepped outside again, wiping her hands on a cloth. "She needs rest," she said, "and quiet. Not men arguing over ghosts of the past." The tall man looked at the cowboy, something shifting in his expression. "We lost a lot on that drive," he said, voice rough. "My brother most of all." The cowboy nodded slowly. "I know, you pushed the herd hard. I did." There was no anger in his voice now, just acceptance. Silence settled between them again, but it felt different. Less sharp, less ready to spark. "There ain't no hidden money," the cowboy continued. "If there had been, I would have paid you back 10 times over. What happened to your brother was a tragedy." "I carry that every day." The simple honesty seemed to land deeper than any denial would have. One of the other men cleared his throat. "We chased a rumor," he admitted. "Thought we could fix loss with blame." The tall man exhaled slowly, tension draining from his shoulders. "Maybe we were wrong." The wind moved through the grass again, softer now. "You can stay the night," Clara said carefully. "All of you, but there will be no more threats." "This town has seen enough of that." The men exchanged glances. Pride flickered, then faded. "We'll ride out come morning," the tall man said at last. "No more trouble." The cowboy gave a small nod. It was not forgiveness, not fully, but it was peace enough for now. As the night deepened, the men kept their distance from the shack. Clara stayed inside with the girl, checking her fever, while the cowboy sat just outside the door. The tension that had gripped the prairie hours before slowly loosened its hold. By dawn, the fever had broken. The first light of morning painted the land in soft gold. The girl opened her eyes, clearer now, and managed a weak smile at her brother. "You always did bring storms with you," she teased faintly. He let out a breath that sounded almost like a laugh. "I'm working on bringing something better." Outside, the 3 riders prepared their horses. There were no hard words as they mounted, only quiet nods. The past would not disappear, but it no longer ruled the present. When they rode off, the valley felt wider, calmer. Clara stepped out into the sunlight, tired but satisfied. The cowboy stood beside her, hat in hand. "I owe you more than thanks," he said. She looked toward the distant town, thinking of her apothecary, the shelves of medicine, the life she had protected. "You owe me nothing," she replied. "Just make sure this is the last storm you bring to my door." He smiled then, not tired this time, but hopeful. "What if I came back without one?" She met his gaze, feeling the warmth rise in her chest. "Then maybe I'd leave the door open." In the days that followed, the story spread through town. Not of a gunfight or a feud, but of a Western romance born in the middle of danger. Of a cowboy who chose honesty over revenge. Of a woman who stood firm when fear told her to hide. The apothecary remained a place of healing. The line shack by the dry creek became a memory of a turning point. And the once feared stranger began riding into town not as a drifter, but as a man building something new. Clara often thought back to the moment the bell rang and he first walked through her door. She had been terrified. She could not have known that what he did next would not destroy her quiet life, but expand it. Sometimes love does not arrive gentle and certain. Sometimes it rides in on dust and doubt, asking to be seen for what it truly is. And when given the chance, it can change everything forever.